Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this sixth in our series of Potato Town Hall meetings. This one's for the fresh chips and bag sector. My name is Jimmy Phillips. I'm from the communications team on potatoes here at AHDB, and I'm your event host. My job is to help you put your questions to the panel, and that is really what this meeting is all about. Before we get into the meeting, there's some housekeeping for me to run through with you. This session is being recorded. To ask a question to the panel, you can use the session chat on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can click Ask to Share Audio and Visual. This is a request to come up onto the stage and ask your question face-to-face. Please note these are the only two ways we'll be accepting questions today. There is a direct messaging function on this platform, but it won't be monitored tonight. And if anyone does come up on stage, it can take a few seconds to get them up here. So please bear with us on that. Following the meeting, the session will stay open for 10 minutes. Chance to have a look at the AHDB Hub, where we've selected some of our most relevant webinars from the last few months, or look in the reception area where there's information on the ballot and also what you get for your levy. If you don't have time for that tonight, you can go to ahdb.org.uk/potato levy at any time. You might get a pop-up asking you for feedback. That's feedback on this platform that we're using. We will email you our feedback form for the event shortly afterwards. On the panel tonight, we've got Nicholas, Alison and Rob. They're going to introduce themselves shortly. So just to let you know, also in the meeting, we've got David Wilson from our Knowledge Exchange team and David Udall from our Market Analysis team. They're on hand should any of the questions you have for us require information from our technical or our MI work. Also present is myself as the event host. We've got Amanda and Sammy from the events team who are there to help you with the platform if you're having any trouble asking your questions or anything like that. We've also got Andy taking notes. After the meeting, within a few working days, the notes and recording of the session will be available on our website. So I'd now like to pass over to Nicholas to introduce himself and the panel.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'll talk for a few minutes about what's going on generally, and then Alison will take over. But I apologise for those of you who've heard me say this before, but let me introduce myself very briefly. I've been around a long time. For those of you who want to date me, I started off life selling Brentford Market before it became Western International. So that's a long time ago. Built the family fruit and vegetable business into a public company. Ended up growing potatoes, amongst other crops, but growing potatoes and packing in Kent, Lincolnshire, and various other places. Farming eventually in South America, Southern Africa, and Europe. So broad experience of general potato growing and fruit and vegetable. I then sold the business and went off, and for the last 18 years I chaired the organic milk suppliers cooperative and built that up into an organisation that exports cheese and butter to the States and infant formula to Australasia, as well as cheeses into Europe. So broad experience in fruit and vegetables. I also for a long time chaired various government agencies, including starting Food from Britain, and I've written quite a few papers on the future of food and particularly agriculture, particularly with Professor Marsh of Reading, for anybody who knew Professor Marsh, great economist who died a few years ago. So basically broad experience, and I was asked, I was about to retire, and I was asked by the Secretary of State, George Eustace, if I would come in and chair AHDB last April. I knew, because he told me, that the request for views, which they had put out to levy payers, had been sitting in DEFRA for 2 years and was about to be published. And I obviously was party to seeing that before it came out. And what it actually said was that some 65% of levy payers across the whole of AHDB wanted a levy to continue, but they were concerned that we weren't good enough on levy payer engagement, in talking with levy payers, and also in delivering value for money. So those were the two challenges that I think George really gave me when I came in. I arrived to COVID-19, so for those of you who want to know how to introduce a change program in a large organisation, when Alison and I, for example, sitting on the board together, have not actually met physically in 9 months, but we've done a lot of work, and the team has done a lot of work. What did I find? I actually think the team's very good indeed. But it is true that across the board, we are not as good as we should be on working directly with our levy payers, good as we should be in delivering value for money or perceived value for money. So what are we doing? And I'm talking now about the whole of AHDB. Alison will talk about potatoes. The first thing is, if you think of an organization that for the last 12 and a half years has had a fixed levy income, it goes up and down a bit, but essentially it's based on a fixed concept. So fixed levy income. So the way it actually runs itself is with levy payers through the sector boards, it actually decides priorities on how to spend that money. Now, that's not the way in which normal businesses work, obviously, because like you, we should be looking at what programs we need to do to deliver value. What would they really cost? Is it reasonable to have those costs transparently? And that should determine the levy for a period of time. And that's what we're moving towards now. So we've told ministers that we want to move to what we call zero budgeting, so that we really reflect the tensions and pressures that everybody's under in determining how we set our programs, our priorities, and therefore the budgets. And we have got to move towards much greater transparency with all levy payers around what our real costs are, so that they can be interrogated. And Alison will show you some of the costs around potatoes that we've clearly got to look at as we go forward. So basically, that's how we are going to focus on cost saving, and we've already got quite a lot of costs lined up to be taken out. We are looking at levy payer collection across the whole of HDB, and it will change, but we are seeking consultation with potato growers about how that would be best applied, so it's simpler and so it actually delivers with least administration. And the other thing is that we are going to introduce 5-year ballots. Forget about the ballot that's going on at the moment, which we'll talk about, but 5-year ballots, so the whole of HDB can be balloted by levy payers on how we're performing. So a lot going on. I could go through with you at length what we're doing about changing the structure of the organisation from the board down, but I don't think that it's something that particularly is of great importance to tonight. But any questions on it when they come into the chat, which Jimmy will manage, I'm quite happy to answer. So essentially a lot going on in trying to improve levy payer engagement, cost saving right across the organisation, and a change in the way that programs and levies will be dealt with. In terms of strategy, which we're out for consultation, and again I say this is across the whole of HDB, so for some sectors it won't apply, but it will override, or it will be part of everything we do. So evidence, much greater emphasis on evidence, information, data, analysis across the whole of the agricultural sector. We think that should really be driving much of what we do in terms of farming performance, but also in terms of profitability, understanding what's happening in markets. We want to do much more around the reputation work in the home market, particularly as we move out of Brexit. So we are now able, despite the European rules on state aid and the WTO rules on state aid, we're allowed to be much more overt now about Britishness, which is important. And again, for those sectors that want it, much more emphasis on exports. So those are two of the main features across the whole of HDB. And also, of course, the maintenance of and development of our work on farm performance, environment, profitability, and helping farmers and growers improve their costs. So that's a very broad, quick overreach of where we're going as an organisation. But for this evening, much more important is where we're going on potatoes. So I'll ask Alison to pick it up from there.
Thanks, Nicholas, and good evening, everybody. I'm conscious that I'm a new face to probably most of you, so I'll just give a quick bit of background to my experience. I joined the potato sector board back in April 2019, and I came in as an independent member with a kind of remit around marketing and commercial matters, given my career, which has been in the food and drink industry. Perhaps worth mentioning in that context that I was marketing director for Coleman's of Norwich, and I then became managing director at Campbell Grocery Products, where we purchase large amounts of potatoes and vegetables from the surrounding fens to supply into our factory at King's Lynn. I became interim chair of the potato board last July, a bit of a baptism of fire. And although I'm clearly not from the potato industry, I'd like to think that I bring a fresh pair of eyes, and I'm listening very hard to the frustrations and the concerns and the challenges expressed by levy payers and what you'd like to see AHDB do differently in the future. So as Nicholas said, I was just now going to very briefly recap on the potato sector strategy looking ahead, and pointing to the sort of top right hand point there. You know, I'm hearing, I know they're just incredible facing people in the industry, particularly growers, and one of those that is absolutely certain is the disappearing of actives, and it's therefore our job to help find alternatives to those. Which brings me across then to the two left-hand bullet points. And the first plank of the strategy at the top there is to increase investment in a whole wide-ranging research program, which will look at the impacts right the way through from seed through to storage. Now, as many of you will probably know, we've got a big project on storage in the wings, but because of the ballot, we're not going to be able to announce the outcome of that. But when that does come, and you know, obviously, fingers crossed that we do get support and a yes vote, then I think you're going to find an incredibly exciting future and approach to doing our storage research. Then the other aspect, a second aspect of the strategy is around crop protection, and not only just doing the work, but ensuring that you as the growers and people in the industry get better access to that advice. Bottom right-hand corner is around marketing. And we want to ensure that potatoes remain relevant to consumers. And so what I've got next is a couple of examples around the marketing programs that we've done on your behalf. So the first of those was at the start of the pandemic in the summer of 2020. We felt it was important to get out there quickly with messaging around potatoes, about how to use, how to enjoy. And that campaign, albeit on a modest budget, reached nearly 6.5 million people. It involved existing creative material that we'd had, so it appeared on video on demand on ITV around very popular programs. We had poster campaigns at supermarkets and a lot of activity on social media, and it seemed to go down well. But the other campaign that I just wanted to really bring to your attention is one that ran back in 2019, The Perfect Chip, because I felt that this was a piece of work that was highly relevant to our audience this evening. So this was really done in conjunction with the Food Advisory Board, which is something that AHDB funds, and they're made up of independent scientists and nutritionists. And the whole idea of this organisation is to be able to go about myth busting, both stopping and responding to stories out there in the media. Now, the Perfect Chip campaign actually set out to, based on a short consumer survey, set out to achieve about 5 pieces of media coverage. Actually, the campaign, because it so captured the imagination of the media, got coverage across 44 national and regional press titles, and even got on TV, got onto BBC Breakfast Time. So, I mean, I had to question this figure because I could hardly believe the number was so great. But that Perfect Chip feature was seen about 1.7 billion times. So again, another example of how I think AHDB does an amazing job of getting a really big bang for your buck. So Nicholas referenced more transparency on costs. So Jimmy, can we just go on to that? Because that is something I just quickly wanted to go through. So this is a kind of a pie chart of where the money has been spent on potatoes in the course of the last year. So top right-hand corner, you can see 28% went on research, and then another 17% goes on knowledge exchange. So it's about making sure that the outcome of those research programs actually gets out via our KE team out to growers in particular, but industry generally. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see a combination of areas there: communications, website and so on, export development, market access, and market development, which is the campaigns themselves. That adds up to about 27%. Then I did want to shout out about market intelligence, not just because we've got David Udall available to join us this evening, but because there is a tremendous amount of data that we provide, ranging from the amount of potatoes that are planted to harvesting reports, storage, and market data. And from my observation, there isn't another organisation out there giving that industry-wide view of what's going on. And without that information, I feel the industry would really be flying blind. But I want to come now to the elephant in the room, which is the 19% that goes on support. And just to flag up, in the first instance, this is probably a bit overstated because there is some cost in there which arguably should be redistributed into the other parts of the pie chart, because they do relate directly to potato activity that gets delivered. But nevertheless, there's a big chunk of cost which goes around things like legal, finance, IT, procurement, facilities, and so on. And I think, you know, we would acknowledge that that figure is too high. And there will be an exercise kicking off shortly, looking at headcount reduction, looking at more operational efficiencies. And so we acknowledge that that needs challenging. But enough from me. I'd now like to hand over to Rob, who's going to talk more about crop protection.
Okay, thank you, Alison. All right, so I'm Rob Clayton. I'm Strategy Director with AHDB Potatoes. I've been in and around potatoes for about 30 years. Either as a researcher, a teacher, a consultant, or a strategist. I have lived on the square in Long Sutton, not quite a Fenlander, but pretty close. Look, I'm going to cover off some of the crop protection issues quite. I'm really going to do this quite quickly. And there's quite a lot to choose from here, but I want to take us a little bit closer to that sort of ballot question, the yes/no voting, and really what I see is at stake on behalf of the industry. And it's the bigger chunk, as you've seen from the circle Alison presented. The biggest chunk of what we do is around this research area, this knowledge exchange, and it's around the crop protection issues. And there are all sorts of them on here, whether it's blackleg weeds or whatever. Equally, also on the north edge of the fens at Sutton Bridge, we've got the storage facility where, recognising the demise of CIPC, we've had to put a lot of effort into that. Problem is, I haven't got an hour to go through all of these. I've got 5 minutes. So I'm just going to pick one case study, which is around blight. So if we go onto the next slide, Jimmy, that would be good. And this, for me, this sums up the sort of value of what you get out of AHDB. But we can tell the story multiple times over. This is about the fight against Blight Network, and it's a network that we administer in terms of setting up all the Blight Scouts who are working voluntarily around the industry. We are funding the research that takes place on the genetics of those isolates at the Hutton Institute. We're also funding the work on fungicide resistance that takes place. And it's a little bit like what's happening with coronavirus at the moment, is if we can understand and manage and monitor the populations, we can do something about it. And typically what happens, this happened way back in the early 2000s, we saw fewbole resistant strains coming in across the channel into Kent and then spreading around, and we were able to do something then, and we've kept on it. We can do the same now, and this is the sort of 2017-2018 position that the industry was in, where we were pretty reliant on fluazinam as crop protection. Whereas by the end of 2017, we were starting to pick up those new strains from Europe that were insensitive to fluazinam. So by working with the network of agronomists and advisors, and by working with that JHI team, we were able to engender wholesale change around the industry in terms of blight protection. And if you look at that, if you look at the green dots here, you'll see that trajectory the industry was on up until 2016. Overuse of particular fungicides. Now, I would wager if we'd have carried on like that, Knowing what we know now about the strains coming in, we would have had an industry that would have been totally unprotected when it came to blight. So you wouldn't have anything to store. That's essentially the situation we were heading towards. So by putting in those mechanisms, we were able to change the fungicide use. Now, I think that has a value. And now it's not just me. If we go on to the next slide, Jimmy, I don't think it's just me that thinks we have a value. And I think there's a point here for growers who have tuned in tonight. Is often what you see is you see the ticket, the advisory ticket that changes hand from the agronomist to the spray operator. It's a recommendation and it ends up in an assurance folder. And then you move on. You move on with the rest of the day. I think the significant bit here, and I think we have to fess up, we've not shouted loud enough about what we do here, is that there's a lot of important decision making that's gone on behind the scenes to get you to a point where the crop is at much lower risk. Okay, so let's skip on a slide then, Jimmy, please. So if you buy that, then thank you for sticking with me. If you don't, I've lost you somewhere along the way. But the concept is the same. Whether we're looking at blight or whether we're looking at aphids and aphicide resistance and the yellow trap network, whether we're looking at the populations of PCN, whether we're putting the right evidence in behind the desiccation work we do, and equally whether we're getting solutions to CIPC in storage. So I think it's a story that we can tell time and time again across a whole host of crop protection issues. Okay, so if we go on one more, Jimmy, that would be good. Right. The other part of this story is just thinking ahead a little bit, that this isn't just about blight and it isn't just about aphids. A press from the continent this week, new action plans for zebra chip. We've seen zebra chip affecting crisping mainly, but it's a threat to you guys as much. We've seen it over the years march up through the Czech Republic and elsewhere in Europe, making sure we're interlocking with all the government agencies around plant health. It's another part of that defence strategy that we've got operating. Okay, and it's an important one. All right, so if we go on one more slide. I'm just gonna go right to the nub of what this conversation's about. It's what is at stake and what is there to lose should AHDB potatoes no longer exist, and that's a function of the no vote. But I think what you have to consider, and I'm going to leave it with everyone to make an informed choice. But there's quite a lot at stake when it comes to the crop protection. There's quite a lot at stake when it comes to the marketing, the education, and the way in which we tell the story out through the spot farms. Whereas the yes is it's acknowledging we're not perfect, so there's lots of work to do, but it's something we can co-create, both levy payers and an organisation. So that's probably the point at which I stop. Okay, thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks, Rob. Right, we're going to get straight into the questions now. So just as a reminder, you can either type them in to the chat on the right-hand side, and Graham's already done that one question for us, or you can request audio-visual, and that's a request to go up on stage. And I can see we've got one of those already. We have got two pre-submitted questions to, and our first pre-submitted question is from Gary Harrison. What are AHDB doing to lobby government about reintroducing CIPC for ambient stored crops? So I think there's a few elements to this question. There's a question about what we do with regards to lobbying, and we'll come to Nicholas on that in a minute. But with specific regard to CIPC, Rob, would you like to comment on that one?
Yeah, do you know what? I think the honest answer here is we are coming to the road. In fact, we have come to the end of the road with CIPC. We know that it is no longer approved at a European level. That brings with it a sort of dearth of support from the ag chem sector. It simply won't be supported. So, and that's without any lobbying or what have you. It's a product we kept going way longer than we were ever supposed to by putting in the stewardship group that stuck alongside it for so many years. So I think that's been a good thing. But we are facing into a position now where We know the European position is pointing us towards a temporary MRL of 0.4. So 4 ppm. That's probably a better way to describe it. Now, think about the geography of the fresh chip sector here, and the sort of interlocking pattern you've got between those who are domestic suppliers and those who are looking towards the Republic of Ireland as a marketplace. That's where the big problem is going to be for us, and it's why we're going to have to get down to those residue levels that are tolerable at a European level, because that's where the export job is going to have to be. Our regulators, CRD, are going to take their time to get to that position. They're pondering whether they should move from a 10 to a 4. We might know a little bit more about that as the summer progresses, but I think it's a piece of chemistry that's on the way out. We've put a lot of work into finding alternatives, but I think that there'll be a point where, in spite of whatever lobbying takes place, when it's not supported at a European level, then there's very little else we can do. Nicholas, do you want to cover some of the general, the kind of lobbying strategies around some of these things?
I think before I do that, I just take a wider point for a minute, and I fully understand the pain and difficulty as we're losing chemistry. I mean, not just on sprout suppressant, but also on storage, but right across the board on growing. I think there is, of course, it's our job to try and make sure we hold on to chemicals for as long as we can, to make sure that we lobby so that, and I use the word lobby, we use the word that we lobby so that we can actually make sure that we are not disadvantaged, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I think we must also recognise this inexorable trend towards the reduction of chemicals, and the work's got to go into not just trying to hold the line, but also to finding alternatives. For alternatives both in terms of chemistry, but also in terms of other ways of doing things. And that's why Alison's point about the storage program is so incredibly important, because that project, which I've had a look at, and it's not my call, but I've had a look at it, is a fantastically interesting project from seed through to storage, and I think changes the game when we can get it through and announced. But going back to lobbying, look, technically we are not a lobbying organisation. The NFU is a lobbying organisation. There are associations around that lobby. Our job is to be evidence-based and to make sure that we show the facts and we talk to the facts, so we get the answers that we are able to get, and we're respected for that. So very interesting. Just to digress for a minute onto DMN, which on sprout suppressant, we couldn't get that through. It was sitting in CRD, the Crop Protection Agency, and we couldn't get answers. And we went in and we said to ministers, we said to the head of health and safety, we said to the head of crop protection, look, this is crazy. You've got DMN allowed in various countries in Europe, not allowed here. We left Europe to reduce the bureaucracy and the officialdom, and now we seem to be increasing it. And I think we have established very quickly that we have got to have a much closer relationship. This is not us establishing it, CRD, a much closer relationship with crop protection in terms of the way this is moving, so that we can iteratively work together to produce positive results. Now, that doesn't mean to say we'll go backwards and we'll be able to chemistries, but it does mean we have a better relationship. And I think that's where, using the word lobbying, we can do our work. But if you expect us to stand in the press and saying that this chemistry or that chemistry should be allowed, no, we won't do that. We'll do it quietly behind the scenes, and I think we are being quite effective. So that's a long answer, Jim.
Thanks, Nicholas. That's great. So what we'll do now is, one of our pre-submitted questions was from Austin Dack. He's actually requested to come up on stage. What I'm going to do is, whilst I sort that out, his question's not dissimilar to Graham Skinner's from the chat. So if I read Graham's to you whilst I'm getting Austin on stage. So Graham's saying, how do you think you could help chip shop sector voice their issues and requirements and make sure they're heard? The processing voice seems to be very dominant compared to chip shops. So anyone want to come in on that one whilst I also bring Austin onto the stage?
Shall I? Yeah, okay, yeah, I can start off with this one if you like, but I think that differential happens because of the level of representation you've got. Processors have the Potato Processors Association, and that links in with the EU PPA. So actually, there's an international network that is pretty skilled and pretty effective when it comes to lobbying. Fresh chips, it's more fragmented. In a way, it's more competitive between businesses, and it's also much more fragmented. So there's a point at which an association or a collective needs to come together to have a voice in a way. Now we can help on all sorts of issues around how we raise some of those priorities. We've actually got a board member, Jonathan Papworth, who is a chipper on the board at the moment. So he's helping us through what some of those issues are. So I think there's a point where perhaps if we get to Austin's question, it might be easier then to piece everything together in one answer at the end. But I think there's something there, Graham, about a network coming together to have a voice.
Okay, yeah. If you want to ask your question.
Is it? I'm okay. Yeah, there are several elements, I think, to the question. I think there's 382 million portions of fish and chips served annually, 1.2 billion annual spend. I saw Alison talking about lockdown activity around supermarkets. Fish and chip shops fed the pandemic. They've been open the right way through. I didn't see any posters. I also run a magazine called Chippy Chat, as well as representing RLD Produce. Chippy Chat goes to over 8,500 fish and chip shops, so we do have voices. We've got the NFFF, we've got masses of voice, so that's not really massively relevant. So, you know, I just think that you've got a 5-year plan, they've got a chance to reform. There's so many skilled people on your side and on our side. I've talked to hundreds of farmers, I've represented seed growers, obviously representing the fish and chip trade. So there is the want, there is the way. So, you know, we need a bit more on the 5-year plan to say, this is how we are going to help this. You know, 80% of people visit a chippy a year, 22% visit every week. You know, they're massive figures. And I think a lot of the farmers and the trade are feeling a little bit ignored, I think.
Okay, yeah, all right. So let me respond. This will be so much easier to respond to on Monday afternoon. And the reason I say that is so I'm invited as a participant to the NFFF. There's the recovery committee that's a new activity kicking off on Monday, and we're invited in there. Now, we've got David on the call as well, David Udall, who I might bring up in a minute, because I think one of the areas where we can help is around understanding the marketplace a lot more. And there might be something that, you know, one of the debates we're picking up at the moment is around whether or not we're all staycationing later on in the year, and just understanding the potential and what that might mean going forwards. But to come back to your point about where does the support sit, basically, what we're doing is we're sort of interrogating the evidence, the marketplace evidence, which has pointed us towards jackets in this round of activity at the moment. But that's quite a dynamic dial. It's quite a dynamic thermometer in terms of where we can point things in the future. And that's the point of the type of analysis we're doing at the moment. We got to a point with things like Chip Week where they just weren't resonating, they weren't working properly, and they weren't having an impact. But I think that, yeah, there are opportunities to work much more closely together. I don't know what those opportunities are yet, but I think by the time we've had the conversation on Monday, and then we've sort of got under the skin a bit of the consumer insight and where the marketplace is going, we'll be in a better position to know. So should I hand over to David just to talk through some of that scoping and that horizon work?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hello, everyone. I suppose there's a couple of different angles to come at it, and it's a very interesting time to start now when we're sort of in the depths of a lockdown, because everything feels rather negative. But as you say, there is still a lot of footfall through chip shops, and that is helping to support the market. But overall, we're still seeing sort of a depressed demand. You know, the food service market is drastically down from where it was sort of 12, 18 months ago. And realistically, we expect that to continue until we get into the early summer months. So really, as Rob was saying, it is that classic summer holiday season when we'll start to see a real surge in demand. One of the real questions that we have comes back to consumer confidence and also the impact of recessionary behaviour on consumers as well, and how that starts to play out onto the market. And that could be something that just helps to sort of stem some of that demand further down the line. I think the other angle that we have to look at is one of the longer term aspects of the market, that we've seen a declining fresh bag and chip area over the last few years. And we've seen relatively depressed prices for the past year, and whether that starts to have an impact on the overall supply for the next season as well. So there's a lot of different things at play with the market at the moment. The speed of which we come out of lockdown, ultimately, as we all know, is going to be the key driver for that. But there's, as Rob said, there is the potential for an upsurge in demand, but it will be very late in the season if it comes. It isn't, going to be coming overnight. It's going to be that May, June, July period, and that season changeover. So it could be a very difficult end to the season for that reason.
Add a comment here is that in all the different discussions that we have with levy payers and the different sectors, some sectors want to see all the money, all the levy going into research, and other sectors want to see all the money going into, say, marketing. And what we need to do going forward is to get a much more dynamic dialogue going on with the different parts of the potato industry to work out what programs of work, what programs of investment are required. So I think that's the sort of a higher level answer as opposed to the specifics right now. But if your particular sector felt you desperately wanted some campaign, we would need to work out how we could accommodate that within the overall budget.
Austin, for anything you've heard or make anything additional whilst you're up here?
No, that's fine. I think we've got the point across. And thanks, Rob, for your answer. I know about the meeting Monday, so we'll find out a little bit more then, perhaps.
Thanks, Austin.
Thank you.
Right, I'm just going to remove you from the screen. Right, so we'll go back to questions in the chat. We've got one here from Chris Dusto. How much research alternatives to MoCap for wireworm control? Are we anywhere close to a replacement? So, Rob, I'll come to you on this one, and I also know that David Wilson, the other David, who's in the meeting, might have something to say on this as well.
Yeah, I'm going to move quite quickly over to David, because it's one where I don't know the detail, but what I can say is over many years, the levy bodies, so going right back through BPC days, have invested eye-watering sums of money in wireworm. We've looked at pheromone trapping, we've looked at slope and aspect, we've looked at different ways of cultivating out of grass, all sorts of things. And to be honest, they none of them took us any closer to finding a solution. So I'm hoping David's got some good news for us, but that's over to you, David.
Good evening, everyone. Yep. So I'm David Wilson, Knowledge Exchange Manager for East Anglia and the South East. And yeah, wireworm is something that's very prevalent at the moment. So the reason I asked to come in on this is I look after Spot East, and for Spot East we have a steering group made up of the host farm, the host agronomist, and other neighbouring farmers. And we try and, at Spot Farm level, we try and tackle local issues and critical issues for the industry. Obviously, we have a research program within the AHDB, but generally that's almost one step back from what's happening on farm. It is stuff that's coming through, and wireworm is one that was identified by the steering group as being critical. So for 2021, we have a trial planned. We've been in contact with some of the manufacturers about products that are coming through. They're not registered yet. They're confident they will be registered very shortly, because the one thing we don't want to be doing is spending levy payers' money on novel products that might never see the light of day. And likewise, we don't want to be spending levy payer money generating registration data for chemical companies when that's their remit. So we have 3 products at the moment that are very likely to be coming through, and we want to get ahead of the curve and understand exactly how they work. I know Rob's touched on the fact that finding a site is a challenge. through the agronomist and the host farmer. We've identified areas on the farm that are at risk, potentially from wireworm, but through the law of the sod, you can guarantee it won't be there. So we also have a plan B where we have a neighbouring farmer who's actually had high incidences of wireworm in previous years in the crop, that's prepared to even put a small area of potatoes back in a known site where we will get damage, so we can get some real data. And what we plan to do is potentially a strip trial comparing products coming through, so we can understand where the way forward is. So our role is not to generate this information for the chemical companies. We are almost here as a witch magazine to compare them and find the way forward. So I'd like to think with a bit of luck, come this time or end of the next year, we'll have some good information for what we're planning.
What we'll do is I'll put a link in the chat so you can get David's contact details if you're interested in that trial in particular, and he can help you get involved in that in the summer. We've got a request to come up on stage now from James Dorr. I'll press the button, James, and ask you to come up. Sometimes we get these as a mistake, so if that's the case, then you can just ignore my request and I'll go on to ask another question. Not seeing James yet, so we'll go on to the question, which is another pre-submitted one, and it is: what work has AHDB done on analysing the impact of the coronavirus? So shall I go to you, Rob, on that? You might want to get David Udall up here again on that one.
Yeah, let's David can come on in a second. Right, let's do David first, and then I'll talk about how this works around the stakeholders. So David, if you cover the detail of the analysis, I'll then talk about the role we have in sharing it.
Yep. So I suppose there's probably two parts to that, and I would say we've had two phases of analysis work that we've done on the impacts of coronavirus. The first was the initial lockdown from 23rd of March last year, where we had the complete closure. And the market at the moment and the lockdowns at the moment are very different situations, because as a society we've learned how to live with it and deal with it and manage it, and as a support how to manage it. But in those first instances, it was a complete closure of everything. So we were doing specific pieces of analysis in early April of last year, looking at the volume of stocks of chipping potatoes and fresh potatoes that were remained on farm. And following that, we did specific pieces of analysis looking at the impact of coronavirus on sectors within the industry, focusing really on the chipping market and processing market in April and May of last year. And that was kind of like the immediate aftermath of the analysis, was just to try and explain what was happening, because as an industry, we see volatility in prices and we see volatility in markets, but predominantly it's driven by the supply side, where we have bad weather, poor quality, lower planting area. Very rarely, if ever, have we seen the severity of demand destruction that we saw in the spring of last year from the closure of the entire market. And that was the shock to the market we had to explain. Very quickly through the summer and all the way through to the work we're doing now, it is our day-to-day analysis, and the work that we're creating on a regular basis is specifically driven by the impact of coronavirus. We have released work last week that was looking at the increase in potatoes consumed over the Christmas period because of more in-home consumption, and we know that about 14% more potatoes in general consumed over that period because of the inability to travel and go elsewhere. And it leads us to other pieces of work that we're doing at the moment, because COVID is just the driver of the market. It is the normal in the market now. So another piece of work we'll be releasing next week will be looking at the impact of coronavirus on individual sectors, and then the potential for the planting area to then change for 2021. So we've got a huge wealth of analysis that's available on our website previously, and it's everything that we're publishing in the Potato Weekly email that's going out every Friday.
David, so just to give you a real-time live of how we're using some of that consumer insight data then. So we've just launched all the work around jacket potatoes as an example for you. That is entirely driven by behaviours that have taken place during lockdown. So on the one hand, we're getting data that tells us it's the hot lunch that is the biggest opportunity we've got as a sector right now, and that people are at home and they can cook, right? But they want that. They want something that goes in the oven so they can carry on working and they can get it out at lunchtime. That's one part of it. The other part of the analysis was that nobody wanted to touch loose because of that fear factor around transmission of coronavirus. So you immediately had a shortfall you had a lower value of pickup when it came to loose jacket potatoes. So part of the response was to turn that into a marketing campaign. But that wasn't what I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you more about our role in making sure the type of information David's team are generating and a lot of the other issues that are coming out, whether it was about how people work in isolation or whether it was about, just getting hold of your critical worker certificate, all sorts of issues like that. We were part of a network that was meeting twice weekly, then weekly, and now fortnightly. We're still meeting, but that pulls together the NFU, the BPTA, Fresh Potato Suppliers Association and Potato Processors Association, just so that we could share all of this intelligence on a very, very regular basis so that everybody was able to build from a platform. And that meeting still takes place. It's still valued. We've moved to fortnightly now, and we just carry on, and we'll keep that running whilever it's got some utility.
So I see James has joined us on the stage now. Thanks for waiting patiently, James. Would you like to... You're just on mute there, James. If you can unmute yourself.
Good evening all. As an ex-board member and the original host spot farmer, I just want some clarity. Alison mentioned storage and changes on the way, but Sutton Bridge, as described in your brochure, and indeed by my own use and relationship, is world class and employs many respected researchers. Rumours abound that it is about to be sold. And is this true? And if that is true, why isn't there any mention of this anywhere leading up to this vote? Because I'm finding it difficult to make an informed decision with the limited information we have regarding the yes/no vote when there's so much not being said.
Well, James, let me try and answer for you. You're obviously aware that sorry, there's a lot. Oh, that's better. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback there. You're obviously aware that we announced some while ago that we were going to embark on a procurement process, which is very tricky to handle when you're a public body, to look at how we should provide future potato storage research in the future. And we did say that we anticipated that that would involve collaborating with a third party in order to deliver that. As Nicholas said and I said, we have got a very exciting outcome to be able to talk to the industry about, but because of the ballot and because of the constraints around being a public body, we're just not able to do that. What I would say specifically with regard to Sutton Bridge is that it's totally acknowledged that that's been an amazing, not only amazing facility, but also an amazing group of potato scientists. The exact future of Sutton Bridge has not been determined at this point in time. So just as you said, they are rumours and speculation, which inevitably, I guess, are happening because we haven't been able to come out with our proposals yet. But they are rumours and speculation about what will happen to Sutton Bridge. What I would say is that our proposals will be about ensuring that there are the facilities and the potato scientists to deliver the next generation of potato storage research in the future. So I'm sorry I can't be more specific than that. I would, dearly love to be getting out there and talking about this whole project, but we just can't right now. And clearly we wouldn't be able to commit to any of our proposals anyway during a ballot period until we know the outcome.
Okay, James, did you want to unmute yourself if you had anything else to say on that, or if not, we can move on. Okay, right. Well, I tell you what, James, if you can unmute yourself, come back. If not, you could put something in. We've got other people who are in the queue to come up on stage, so I'm going to ask Chris Leslie. Chris, if you are able to come up and ask your question, you can go for it. James, if you can unmute yourself, you can also go for it. I'm also going to invite Robin Cropper, who's also requested to come up on stage. Robin, if you'd like to come up, you should have the opportunity to do that now. Oh, here's James.
Oh, sorry, just managed to do that. Yeah, I'd just like to make a couple of notes on that. For largely processing growers, that the largest, apart from the chemical side and everything else, the biggest return, the best bang for our buck is storage side. And if we're going to lose that largely on the storage side, and so, you know, outsourcing rarely works. I've been involved with loads of things in my lifetime in potatoes. Outsourcing rarely works, and it always costs more. And I'm really worried. I'd like a reduction in the levy right out if you're going to sell the Sutton Bridge. I think it'd be a great mistake, and you need to come clean before the vote. Thank you.
Can I come in on that, Jimmy? Because I think that everybody does understand. Look, the reason we can't actually announce the project and the outcome, and whether or not Sutton Bridge will form part of it or not, is because in a tender process you've got several people tendering, and once you have actually decided to announce it, you have to announce which one has won the tender and how it then proceeds. Now, to do that, you've got to be sure you can actually complete on the tender. We can't be sure because we have a ballot going on. So everybody is aware that no decision publicly will be made until the ballot is decided. So that's why we can't announce, and that's why we can't discuss it. And you know, however uncomfortable we are all about that, that's a fact. The other thing I would say to you, James, is that we recognise that the potato storage is absolutely fundamental. And I can assure you, when you actually, hopefully, when we get a yes vote, when you look at the project, it isn't about abdicating our responsibilities for storage research. It definitely isn't that. I think the one thing that is for sure is when we compare our work going forward, being a world-class organisation in terms of storage, when we look at it going forward and we look at some of the skills that are out there, we need to work in combination with other people who actually are already in some spaces which are really interesting. And this project is not just about storage, it's about how you actually have the right seed to be able to deal with the right crops, to be able to do with the right storage going forward. So it's quite a complex opportunity to look at something that's really cutting edge. And I'm sorry we can't go any further than that, but that's how it is.
Thank you, everyone. Right. We'll go on to our next pre-submitted question. And it says, you have said that we may be benefiting via our agronomist, but is it right that I pay my levy and then I pay my agronomist to come to your events? So, Rob, do you want to kick off on that one? I guess it's another one that David Wilson might have something.
David will have more practical experience than me, but I just want to reflect back on the blight example that I gave you earlier. That you know, this is about how we work in harmony, right? And it is a bit sensitive at times, but I think the best way I can put it is there's absolutely nothing wrong, no objection whatsoever to agronomists and advisors adding value to some of the fundamental stuff that we do, right? And they do so much more. Yeah, absolutely okay with that. And they have skills and knowledge that we don't have on the payroll at all. So that's beyond doubt for me. There's also nothing wrong with admitting that we can't furnish every single individual field scenario from some of the more generic trials that we do, but we can put a lot of principles and we can be stewards and custodians of good science that is so important. So that's the starting point. But I think, as I pointed out, the area that is most interesting to me right now is this whole piece around the brand. I'd love for every agronomist to go up a farm drive and say, this is what I got from AHDB, and this is the extra bit I'm adding value to. But sometimes those conversations don't happen. Sometimes they do. Perhaps a good time to hand over to David, who'll have some, I know you've been working with VCS and people like that on your site, so just telling your story might be interesting.
Yeah, so obviously I mentioned before that we have these steering groups behind the Spot Farms, and we always engage local agronomists in for their input. Because I've said on a previous meeting that my title is knowledge exchange, and I've always been slightly fixated on the word exchange, that it's not just knowledge transfer, it's not just us dumping things on you. In the past, perhaps because we've done work, we think you should have it and we just deliver it. And it's maybe not listening to what's wanted. And that's a key part of working with the agronomists, because one thing we regularly get challenged with is, if you compare us to cereals, our colleagues in cereals, they provide the RL list where they take all the different breeders' varieties and they compare them like for like, and they highlight the strengths and weaknesses. And that's something we can do on a Spot Farm. Agronomists are seeing a wide variety or a wide selection of varieties across different soil types, and they're learning, and breeders are trying their varieties in different soil types. But at a Spot Farm, we can pull all these varieties into one place and then blanket treat them with chemistry or seed rates or fertilizer, and we can learn and almost speed up the process that you wouldn't necessarily, having been outside the fence with the ag chem side of things. The manufacturer's product is always the best. They're selling a product, and to be approved, that they all work and they are all good, but there's certainly a place for us to be comparing like for like and learning or finding learns for you as growers. Some growers prefer to be told that they pay good money to agronomists and they want the best service, and if we can inform the growers, we'll try our best to do that. But we also want it to be tangible for growers to come, that they can come see what we're doing and almost like a Blue Peter sheet have a take-home thing they can try. And if we're doing a split field trial, they can perhaps go home. If I think back to the desiccation work, we've sort of got it nailed down now where a grower could do alternate tram lines with the two best treatments over the last 2 years and see how it performs on their own farm. Agronomists can fine-tune that, but they can see that from the Spot Farms. So I think there's definitely something for both growers and agronomists. And Rob alluded to it, that agronomists are a great vessel for getting our message out onto farm. They each have a huge reach covering large areas. But the one thing we need to be better at is badging up and branding the information that is being spread by everyone that's been created by AHDB.
Thank you, David. And as I say, I've put David's contact details, or a link where you can get his contact details, into the chat. So if you want to get hold of David after the event, you can do that. So we're just 2 minutes left in the meeting now. So last call for questions. If you put in the chat, we don't get to it, we will follow up with you afterwards. And perhaps to close the meeting, Nicholas, I might ask you to reflect on what would a yes vote mean from levy payers in this ballot, and what alternatively might a no vote mean?
Yeah, fine, Jimmy. I mean, I won't go through the, I think the good presentation about that Rob did. I think it's quite clear that a no vote is to stop all the work of AHDB on potatoes, potato storage, potato disease, marketing, all of those things. That's what a no vote means. Some people have said, well, a no vote is to kick AHDB in the whatever, to make them actually perform better, and wouldn't that be great? No, that's not what a no vote is. It is simply no, stop the levy and stop all the work. And there is no organisation out there who can take it up. And it's not about asking government to create a new organisation that would do it differently, because government won't do that either. So a no vote is to stop the levy and actually to stop all the work of AHDB. A yes vote, I have to say, is actually not just a simple yes vote. It is actually a yes vote based on the changes that we're saying we're going to bring in. it doesn't stop us being held to the fire, because not only will there be a 5-year ballot going forward on the performance of AHDB, which I've said before, I've said to ministers should be in 2 years, starting in 2 years' time, not 5 years' time, at the 5th anniversary of the request for views. So in 2 years' time, you'd have a chance to kick us out again anyway. But I think it's also very much more about engaging together to drive the industry forward, rather than letting the industry then, actually, I have to say, at a very difficult time, wallow without a central organisation doing this work. Now, there is a question for Chris Marshall in the chat room, if you've just seen it, which says, why is it only a binary vote? Why is it a yes/no vote? Why is it a vote, one levy, one vote per levy payer? Why is it? Why is it constructed that way? It just is. I'm sorry, Chris. It was part of the original statute that said if more than 5% of a sector wants to call for a vote, then it can do so. If it calls for a vote, then AHDB have got to conduct a vote. It should not be conducted by AHDB. It should be conducted by a separate professional organisation, and it can only be on the simple question of yes or no. Now, I find that, if we look back, I find that unsatisfactory for many, many reasons. It gives voters a very difficult choice, because, as I said, it's not about, for example, general elections where you're voting for a change of government. It's not as if you're actually voting for the end of government, which is what a binary vote yes/no would mean. Do you believe in government? Yes or no? No, this is about, do you want the Conservatives, or do you want Labour, or do you want Social Democrats, which is a very different situation. In this case, it's very simply laid down by law. It's yes or no. And that is why, I guess, they originally said that vote would then go to ministers. That's not just DEFRA ministers, but it's the devolved authority of Scotland and Wales, for them to decide what to do with that information. So at this moment in time, Chris, I can't actually either, I can't change it. It's the way it's structured. I think in the future we may all agree that it should be structured differently. I can't tell you what the result will be, because it is for ministers now to decide. But I can tell you that on this particular situation, or a yes/no, no is to stop. It isn't to start again. It's to stop. A yes is to continue, hopefully in a different way, in terms of better engagement. Now, I hope that answers the question.
That's a good summary. Thank you, Nicholas. So we've come to the end of scheduled meeting. So we will close there. I think we got to all the questions, but what I would say as we close is that if you'd like Rob, Alison, David to come and visit a smaller meeting, or to talk on the phone, or whatever that might be, we're very happy to do it, both during the ballot period and after. So please use that meet the team hyperlink that I put into the chat. Get hold of one of us, and we'd be very happy to come and talk to you or other groups of people. But for tonight, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon.